$8?
I got him now, and he's oh, I gave him
Happens.
the bill.
Yeah. As we get my memory right. We'll get going. Good evening. Welcome to our 223rd meeting. Are there any new members here tonight? Any guests here tonight? Golly, just us. Okay, that's good. I do have a special announcement to make. Uh, Board of Directors has made arrangements with DXO. All DPI-SIG members a 20% discount on all their software. It's not quite. So anyway, we'll be sending out a message that has a link, a coupon. You click on that, and when you get ready to check out, you get your 20% discount. They did give free copies of all the programs to the club, and we will be covering some presentations on DXO software, and we'll be including it in some of the workshops that we have now. So we'll be getting more into DXO. I want to thank Nancy Garrison for bringing the refreshments tonight. Don't forget the free table. We'd like to have everything off there before you leave tonight, if at all possible. It's all free. You can't beat the price. At the end of the meeting, there will be 6 door prizes. Excuse me. And we'll start the meeting off tonight with a tribute to Brian Peterson, who just passed away. Everybody here should be familiar with him. We've been giving away his books at the door prizes for 10 years at least, maybe longer. In fact, soon as I heard he passed away, I went to get some for the door prize tonight, and of course I didn't have any yet. I gave 2 of them away, I think, last month. So we'll have a tribute, and that will be done by Malin Stacy. Malin, all yours. Thank you, sir. So we've been having a few presentations on the history of photography here, and I do quizzes once in a while. I put up a few names here, which I looked up over the past couple of days since I heard about Brian's death. Stieglitz, Sneepsey, Daguerre, Fox Talbot, Cameron, Raylander, Brady, and George Eastman. Some of their photos. I don't have a photo from Eastman. I'm sure he had a bunch of them. And then at the bottom, I put Minnie Morgan. Any of you know Minnie Morgan? Didn't think so. That's my grandmother. This got to be personal for me. Minnie was inspired. You ready? Was inspired to get into photography in the 1890s by these folks. These were the people who had pictures in publications and newspapers, and she learned how to do photography. She developed her own glass plates and has pictures of our family back from the early 1900s. She inspired my father. My father inspired my brother, then he ran away.
Then my brother inspired me. He brought me my first camera from Germany in 1956. So who out here has been inspired who inspired you to get into photography? Somebody give me an answer. Who is your inspiration? Gene Smith, who is that? Eugene Smith? Okay. Life photographer. I got going on the Time Life books on photography. That was something that I got into. I also went to the Nikon school, weekend school they used to do back in the days in the 70s. Got me going. Who else? Who inspired you to take pictures? You don't know? The camera showed up in your hand one day? See? Yep. Okay. So you got it through school in a way. Okay, good. Well, Brian, of course, was a photographer. He was a commercial photographer 30 years. And then he got into teaching people and sharing his photography with folks. On April 5th, he passed away. His lens not only captured the world, but helped millions see it in a new light. He was a world-renowned photographer. He was celebrated for his vibrant, expressive work and his uncanny ability to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. And he was way off the wall and out of the box, I think. His words and his images ignited passion in countless aspiring photographers, many of them whom credit Brian with giving them their creative start. How many of you have you read one of Brian's books or looked at one of his books? Or yeah, quite a few of you. Or taken his classes, been to his YouTube, done his workshops, any of that. So he had at least 3 websites that I found. Picture Perfect School of Photography goes back to the early 2000s. He had a blog that he did, and he did youkeepshooting.com, which was his latest and last adventure. He had so many books that he published throughout the years that he was teaching photography. And as Sonny said, we had some of them here that we gave away. He got onto YouTube. Now I've got 5, 10, 15, and 158 more YouTube videos that were out there that Brian did. So he was expressing himself in that way. He was a speaker for us. He spoke here in 2021. The Zoom from Indonesia, I think, is where he was, he said at the time. And I was going to see if this works.
It does make a big difference. Somebody said, give all the credit to here in part. Looking at shoot an iPhone, the Super Bowl, just not going to happen. You're not going to show up and say, I'll shoot this with an iPhone for sports journalism. It's taken service. So you're going to shoot lens it's necessary to get the bottom one. So, okay.
You're at 22, right?
Yeah, that's 22. Right. Absolutely. Equipment does make a big
Okay. No!
Stop!
He did workshops, and he did them all over the world. I just have a list here from 2012 of all the ones that were listed on his website that year. Anybody here ever take any of his workshops? Yeah, a couple of you have. Okay, good. Paul McKinney got me onto it, and he sent me some stuff. This is a picture that Paul took of Brian in Savannah a couple of years ago, and you can read the quote from Paul on this. This image to me is simply Brian being Brian. We were discussing the devastation of Hurricane Ian on Southwest Florida while walking down a street in Savannah last spring. Brian bellows, hurricane. Brian never, ever just mailed it in. And these are some pictures of Brian and Paul took on the various outings. What happened?
What happened?
Well, he didn't wake
Well,
up
he
one
didn't wake
day
up one day
to be a photography instructor.
instructor.
He created a
He
body of
created a
work that
body
drew
of work
people
that drew people to him. And then he discovered how much he
Sharing
loved
that.
sharing that with people.
and he probably figured out he could make some money doing it too, so that helped. So here's a sampling of Brian's images for you to get what his work was. Say thank you to him because I know he inspired me indirectly. One of my instructors when I started getting into this after retirement in Jekyll Island was a fan of his. And so I got some of it indirectly. Thanks for sharing your creativity. Thanks for teaching us how. Thanks for showing us the outside of the box. And thanks to all the other instructors, teachers, guides, folks who have shared stuff with us, YouTube gurus, authors, speakers like Dan tonight, and friends who inspire us to be better photographers. Some of those are here in the room, maybe many of them, maybe all of them. Thank you all. I heart.
You can think about Dan?
No.
Okay.
Introduce
Introduce yourself. Hang on a second. Here, let me
Going.
going.
Sonny,
Anything written up ahead of time?
I apologize, Dan.
No problem.
okay, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. You're on.
All right. Well, first of all, I just thank you for that tribute. Brian Peterson, talk about inspiration. He was a big inspiration to me, especially early in my life. My dad was a photographer, and he had Brian Peterson's books. So when I was, 11 or 12, when I first picked up a camera, one of the first photos I picked up was learning to see creatively, and that was my dad's bookcase. And so I was pretty sad to hear the news the other day, but I think your truth is very much on point, and I will impact myself included, and I'm sure any others in the club. So, with all that said, my name is Dan Waterman. I've been a photographer for almost 20 years. My educational background is in graphic design, and so I spent a great deal of time in Photoshop, as well as the other in design, Illustrator, etc. So I spent a lot of time in Photoshop in my professional career, and also in my personal life. And so through that experience, I've learned of techniques that make full use of Photoshop's layering and masking capabilities. I've down in projects including architecture, landscapes, weddings, concerts, portraits. My favorite subjects are landscapes, both infrared and light, and birds and wildlife. Like I said, so it's actually all about selections and by-action masking in Photoshop. So I'm gonna pull up my screen here. So we're tonight. This is gonna be a crash course how to select some of the trickier stuff. You know, we're going to be focusing on hair tonight, but you can apply to fur, trees on horizon line, really killing your image with a nice clean edge. And then so you know, people have to be kind of a bigger part of it, so more. We're going to talk about what masks are, help with thermal control, and you know, this is kind of base for photographers. Better we all can raw, who have spent time in the dark room there too. And so, you know, we'll be talking quite a bit about that. So this presentation is pretty hands-on, and we'll leave space for questions and exploration. So selections are kind of, you can't reach, like you can't adjust tone or composite different images if selection is not on point. So the goal is kind of balancing precision and ease. You'll spend 45 minutes. Assumes that you have at least interface masking, like everything doing as a concepts will get you. Most important thing, seals, black conceals, gray blends, all mixed presentation, but it's one of those things. So, I've heard Photoshop, and at the risk of making you all queasy tonight, I'm see this will be the ugliest photo of the evening. So this is a typical use case where you might have a studio photo where you want to mask out the person and put them on a different background. Maybe you're using it for a greeting card, you want your background instead of a white one. This is pretty simple. 1 to 10 in terms of selection complexity, 2 or 3. So we're going to start there. So throughout this presentation, we'll make use of kind of the latest tools in Photoshop. We're not going to focus so much on generative AI, more AI-assisted tools. So for years, obviously, as with everything else, Adobe has really pushed AI and added new AI capabilities to their software. But the most relevant thing, from my perspective, especially for a use case like this, where we're talking about advanced masking, is some of the elements that are under the hood, things that aren't so flashy. They don't necessarily advertise for it. But capabilities that are intended in Photoshop years ago. So traditionally, we might have had to use one of the lasso tools to make a manual selection, and then use brushes, and it got pretty tedious to select. Photoshop's got much more advanced in its capabilities over the years. And so now in the select menu, they have these kind of preset options. Subject, sky, they added focus area recently. And so in a case like this, where the subject is pretty clearly defined in the background, select subject gets us to a good starting point. Now, I say starting point because this is really not, I wouldn't consider the default select subject as a uh, as a final selection. So I'll illustrate. So when you first select subject, or when you're in any of the selection tools, including magic wand, etc. This subject button is at the top. So this button does the same thing as going to the select menu and clicking subject. So if I turn this selection into a mask by clicking the mask button in the layers panel, looks good on the surface, but let's put a subcolor behind it and see what we'll with here. So you can see there are some areas of that background that still show through. Because it looks so natural with something like that, and this edge is kind of hard on an area that's not perfect. The when color for hair. I'm going to start with a black brush. So I'm going to switch my foreground and background colors so that black is the foreground. And I think some of these flyaways are a little harsh, a little unnecessary. So I'm just going to start painting using the soft light blend mode and flow around 40 to 50%. And now I'm doing this just on the mask, just to demonstrate what's happening as I do this. Normally I would be looking at the image as I'm doing this. Okay, so I'm going to put a background color. So now, as I paint on this mask, again, using that brush that we were just talking about, I'll be able to see much more clearly what's happening, how far I want to go with it, and the amount of adjustment that might be needed. Now, if I wanted to bring some of these areas back in, I would switch to a white brush and similarly just paint along the edge here. And so, sometimes it takes a little finesse, a little push and pull going back and forth between a black and white painting just to kind of dial in what you want the hair strands to look like. But, that's a pretty solid selection considering that we started from a very challenging scenario where the edge is not very clearly defined. It's hard for Photoshop to kind of make heads and tails of it. We end up with this. And then, so as an end result, you might add a bit of a vignette effect, and this could make a great greeting card, and then we have the ability to move her around and, add text. We could scale her up or down, etc. So that's one of the more complicated kinds of selections you might end up doing. It's a very similar process if you're selecting a bird's feathers, for example, and also very similar if you're selecting a sky. A sky, kind of like our first example with my headshot, is generally going to be easier just because the horizon line is going to be a little more clearly defined. And in an image like this, again, using the AI-assisted tools as a starting point, you might go with select sky, and then we would follow a similar process. So we'd go into select and mask interface. You'd use the refine edge brush, and once we're pretty comfortable with our selection, we can output to a selection, create a mask, and from there, on that mask, again, we can, I'm flying through it with this image because, I don't want to bore you with the same thing over and over, but, we would go through the same process using that kind of push and pull method of brushing onto the mask to get that edge really clearly defined. And then once you have a really solid selection, so I'm just going to invert this, you can put whatever sky up there that you want. Photoshop does have a edit sky replacement option as well. So if we wanted to turn this off, that's one of the generative AI enhancements that they came up with in recent years. Most of the photographers I've talked to, and myself included, don't love this just because it's kind of unless you start inputting your own sky backgrounds, to me it kind of gets away from the fun and the art of shooting a photo, being there at the scene, kind of the technical complexity of that. But the option is there if you choose to use it, and it's, as you can see, really amazing how quickly it selects the sky, replaces it with something else. So just noting that in case you weren't aware of the edit sky replacement option. Okay. So we've talked a bit about masking and selections in a more kind of traditional way, you might say. Using Photoshop's selection-specific tools. But now we're going to jump into luminosity masks. And this is going to be working much more with the channels interface. So let's define a couple things. What is luminosity and what are channels? So luminosity, there's a technical definition which is kind of a little too in the weeds for the application of photography. It relates to the brightness of light reflecting off of a surface and how the human eye perceives that light. But when people talk about luminosity masking, when you hear the term luminosity as it pertains to Photoshop, Lightroom, other digital photo software, you can just think of it as the relative brightness of pixels in an image. Basically exposure. That's kind of how we would define it. Now, what are channels? So a channel is a kind of tonal map, if you will. So I'm sure you're familiar with RGB, red, green, blue, and that's how our digital monitors display images, where every single pixel, every individual square in this grid that composes our image is made up of layers of red, green, and blue. And the relative amounts of those create the final color. So in the info panel, if you hover over a pixel, you'll notice that we have different kind of definitions here. So this is the RGB. So if I hover over one of these blue the size of the building, these rocks over here. So that indicates there's a lot of red tonality in these sections of our photo. But then the plants over here are very dark. There's not a lot of red in the plants. There's not a lot of red in the pixels. Okay? So what would we expect from the green channel? We would expect that the plants would be a lot brighter than they would be in the red channel. And we would expect these red rocks, which when we were looking at the image before, we can see it's pretty obvious that there's a lot of red in there. But just kind of breaking down how this functions in the channels palette, if I click the green channel, and I'm just going to cycle between red and green, looking at the rocks, we can see that there's less green. The rocks are darker in the green channel. And the plants, which are pretty dark in the red channel, are much lighter in the green channel. And then, like we were talking about with the sky earlier, relatively dark in the red channel and very bright in the blue channel. So our final RGB image is these three kind of tonal maps layered on top of each other, and the monitor takes the value of each channel at each part of the image, and that's what displays the final output. So channels are different from layers in that channels are just representations of tonality, whereas the layer is what contains the actual pixels. Okay? So I know this is kind of like a long-winded technical explanation, but it's kind of important to understand for what's coming next, that a channel is not a selection, it is not a collection of pixels. It's kind of a representation of pixels, if that makes sense. So if you command click on a thumbnail in the layers panel, it's going to select the entire image. It's going to do kind of select all in this case because the bounds of our image go to the very edge, and we don't have any transparency in this image. So if I command click here, it's going to select the entire layer bound from edge to edge. Now, if I made, say, a rectangle shape, just put it right in the middle here. So that's going to create a rectangle layer. If I command click on this layer, it's going to select the outer bounds of the layer because that's all the pixels that are present. It works a little differently in the channels palette, where if you command click on the RGB layer, we're looking at effectively the same image in the RGB channel as we are in the layers panel. But again, this is a representation of tones. And what is a mask? It's kind of a representation of tones. It's a representation of what is visible, what's not. And a mask uses light and dark tones to selectively show or hide certain things, just like the red channel is using light tones to selectively show red here and hide it here. A mask would be using lighter tones to show part of an image and darker tone to hide part of it. So if I command click on the RGB channel, instead of the entire image from edge to edge being selected, you see the marching ants are only going around certain areas. So again, the channel being representation of tones, when you command click on a channel, it selects everything that is 50% brightness or greater in that image. So you can see it ignores these really dark shadow areas in here, but it selects the brighter areas of the rocks. It selects the sky. So effectively, what we just did is we selected all of the highlights in the image, everything that's brighter than 50% gray, or everything that's brighter than 50% brightness. So now, if I turn this into a new channel, just like we would do with a new layer or layer mask, I'm going to click the new channel button, which looks just like the layer mask button in the channels panel. And you see it creates alpha 1. Now, if I click alpha 1, I'm just going to deselect, hitting Command D or Control D on Windows. So this is a tonal map of all the pixels in our image that are 50% gray or lighter. Now, by this same logic, if we return this, I'm going to select this again. Now, in the Layers panel, I'm going to create a Curves adjustment layer. And if this happens, where it shows up kind of a wonky color, it's because you've got a channel other than the standard RGB and red, green, blue channels active. So I'm just going to turn off this alpha 1. But you can see that what we just did was output our channel here to a new mask on this curves layer. And so if I make any changes, it's really only affecting the highlights in the image. And just by comparison, if I turn off this mask, it makes the whole image much brighter because this is a global change now. This is affecting all the darkest shadows, everything below the 50% midtones. So perhaps you can see where we're going with this. The goal of a luminosity mask is to select very targeted areas of the image based on the tone or based on the brightness. So in this image, we might want to say darken some of these shadow areas without clipping these blacks too much. You know, just adding a little bit of what you might think of as micro contrast in these darker shadows without affecting the sky or some of the highlights we have going on here. And if we were to just use a curves or levels adjustment on its own, affecting the whole image, let's say that we wanted to, let's say we're aiming to just darken this area a little bit and have some contrast. Doing that to the whole image affects the whole image, obviously, and a very small change on this curve is going to have a pretty drastic effect on the overall contrast in our photo. It also makes it really difficult from this starting point to isolate specific areas of the image, say if we were to try to use a brush. So I'll just demonstrate that for a moment. I'm going to switch this to black. I'm going to use a white brush, and even with zero hardness, I'll just put this back to normal blend mode, flow at 100%. It's hard to get a really precise selection here, and especially if we're trying to really target, you know, just these dark areas, just this dark area, just this dark area. It gets pretty tedious to paint a mask on here. Okay, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to hide the curve for a moment. So back to where we were a moment ago. We selected all the highlights, anything that was greater than 50% brightness. So I'm just going to call this this new channel that we created Lights 1. It's kind of a general selection of highlights. Now, if we want to refine this further, remember, command clicking or control clicking on Windows on a channel thumbnail in the channels panel will select anything that's 50% brightness or greater. Right now, that is this entire, that's everything that we have on this channel. But if we want to refine this further, you might think, oh, okay, well, we'll just, now that we have this selected, we'll just select it again. It's not quite that simple, but it's pretty close. In this case, we're going to want to use the intersect option. So if we were to go here, for example, just to the pen tool, this just kind of illustrates the different options that are available. So add or combine would add to the selection arbitrarily. Subtract would subtract from something else, but we only have one channel right now, so we won't use subtract. What we want to do is intersect. So when you're holding down Command on Mac or Control on Windows, that brings up the regular selection tool. If I hold down Command and Shift at the same time, you see that my cursor changes, it adds a plus in that little white box. I'm just going to zoom in on that so you can kind of see that close up. So this is just holding down the Command key or the Control key on Windows, holding down the Shift key, adds, and then if I also hold down the Option key or the Alt key on Windows, so in total right now I'm holding down Command Shift Option or Control Shift Alt in Windows. That brings up the intersect option. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to click on this layer, and now this is going to take the top 50% brightest pixels of what we have selected, which is the top 50% brightest pixels of the whole image. So effectively, we're narrowing our selection down to kind of the top 25% of the brightest pixels. And now if I save that as another channel, I'm going to deselect Command D, just so we can kind of look at the difference here. And you can see that our mask, or our channel, got even further refined, where the shadows become darker and darker. So if we output this to a mask, the changes we do in the layers panel are going to be even more targeted toward the highlights and affect the shadows even less. So we can take this a few steps further. So I usually, for luminosity masks, I like to go to 5 levels. I find that gives me the best range to work with. So I would just call this one that we just created Lights 2. You can call it, whatever you want. It's kind of common in the luminosity masking tutorial space to use Lights 1, Lights 2, or lights, super extra lights, something along those lines. Whatever works for kind of how your brain interprets it. So now I'm going to do the same thing that we just did. I'm going to intersect this Lights 2 channel, and that's going to take the top 50% of the top 25%. So we're kind of using a logarithmic scale and getting more and more refined toward the absolute brightest highlights. And you can see now we've just got the really bright areas of the lighthouse and a few key areas of the rocks and the sky selected. Okay, so that's a pretty good refined selection of highlights. So again, you can go as far as you want with this, but that's kind of how to create the basic highlight areas in a nutshell. Now, if we want to create shadow luminosity masks where we're able to target specific shadows, we could either start from the beginning, starting from our RGB channel, command clicking. Now this selects the top brightest 50% pixels. Now we want to target shadows, which are going to be the lowest 50%. So I'm going to invert this selection. So I'm going to go to select inverse or Command Shift I. That selects the opposite. And now I'm going to create a new channel, and it's going to appear like a negative photo. Now, if we go through the same process, so now that this is targeting only the shadows, I'm going to go through the same process of intersecting the mask. I'm just going to call this Darks 1, Darks 2. We'll do the same thing, intersect this one. So we're always kind of intersecting the most recent one that we created with itself. And then we'll go to Darks 4 for this image. Now, we might also want to target just the midtones. We might want to make kind of a global curve adjustment like this that doesn't affect the brightest highlights or the darkest shadows, but affects everything in between. So in that case, instead of command clicking on the thumbnail of the RGB channel, I'm going to select the entire image. So I'm going to hit Command A. And then what I want to do is subtract the highlights and shadows so that we're left only with the mid-tone areas of the image. So I'm going to use the Command Option. Going to hold down those keys. So I'm going to click, after selecting all, I'm going to click Lights 1 and Darks 1. Now it's going to come up with this this message: no pixels are more than 50% selected. That's okay. It's going to look like we don't have a selection at all, but there are actually pixels being selected right now. it just doesn't show the marching ants. So I'm going to output that as a channel. And unfortunately, with the midtones, it's not as simple as just, Command-Shift Option, clicking on this. Now that we have it, we kind of have to go through this process a few times where we select all, subtract. In this case, it's going to be lights 2 and darks 2. And that's going to be our second midtones. Again, select all, subtract lights 3 and darks 3, and so on. Now, you're probably thinking, at the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned, trying to avoid the tedium of doing a lot of manual work. That was a lot of manual work. I recognize that. So I created a luminosity mask action, which sets all this up for you. This is one that I put together. It's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to delete all these masks and I'll show you how it works. So we go back to the base of just the RGB and red, green, blue channels. I'm going to run this action on the image, and it just automatically creates everything that we need. Now, this is also a relatively tedious way to do it. There are panels out there. Greg Benz, if you're familiar with him, he's a photographer, great landscape photographer, and also a great software developer. He has a software panel called Lumenzia, which integrates with Photoshop as a panel, just like the layers palette, just like the channels palette, etc., where there are buttons that say, create luminosity mask, create a lights mask, create a darks mask, delete all masks, that kind of thing. And it's only $35 to $40. It's not prohibitively expensive. But if you find yourself wanting to use luminosity masks a lot and really explore this technique, one of those panels can be really helpful. So Greg Benz, Lumenzia, that's one. There are others out there, so your mileage may vary. But at least in the context of this presentation, I wanted to show you how luminosity masks work, how they're set up, before we kind of dive into the actual nuts and bolts of editing an image using them. So now you kind of have an idea of what these all are. So with the action that I just ran, we have 5 levels of highlights that get progressively more and more focused on only the brightest areas. 5 areas of shadows that get progressively more and more focused on the shadow areas. And again, white reveals, black conceals. So any edit we make using, say, the shadows 5 layer is only going to affect these light pixels that we're seeing here. So it looks kind of inverted in the channel, but when we output it to a mask, it's only going to affect those certain areas. And similarly, we've got mid-tone adjustments that get progressively more and more refined into a narrower band of the brightness spectrum. So now, bringing this all together, here's where the fun part comes in. You've created all your luminosity masks. You've got a whole bunch of options to choose from. And now you can really get creative with the kinds of edits you want to do. So this image as a starting point isn't bad, but let's say that we want to make the sky a bit darker. Like I said earlier, maybe we want to kind of increase the contrast, the micro contrast, if you will, of some of these shadow areas. Maybe we want to increase the contrast of the clouds, or bring up, change the color tonality of some of these rocks. So we have kind of a whole palette of options to choose from. So I'm going to start with these shadow areas that we were talking about before. And you can kind of cycle through the different options. If you just click on any of these channels, it will show you kind of what your mask is going to look like, almost like a preview. I kind of like the shadows 4 and 5. I think they both work pretty well. But I'm going to start with 4. I find that as a general rule of thumb, kind of the middle areas, the middle options, so like highlights 2 through 4, with 3 as kind of a baseline, shadows 2 through 4 with 3 as a baseline, and midtones 2 through 4 or 3 through 5, depending on how subtle of an adjustment you want. That tends to work well as a start point. So I'm going to use shadows 4, and now I'm going to command click on my shadows 4 channel. I'm going to go back to the RGB, have that selected, and now I'm going to create a curves adjustment where that shadows 4 channel is now output as a mask. And so now we're applying white reveals, black conceals. So any adjustments I make on this curves layer are only going to affect these areas that appear light in the mask, because this is a shadow luminosity mask. It's only going to show the edit in those areas. So now I'm just adding some contrast using kind of a basic S-curve. But you can see how far I'm moving the mouse around and how much control I have relative to if I were trying to do this again on the entire image. If I hide this mask, you'll see how much of an effect this particular S-curve that I just drew is going to have. It makes everything way too strong in contrast. The darks get way too dark, the lights get way too light. It's just kind of an uncomfortable look. But with the luminosity mask, we have a lot of precision, so we can make more refined adjustments. It's almost like taking a range slider and like zooming in on it, so you have more range. So now if I hide this curves layer that I just made, again, you can see how subtle of a change that is, but it's impactful. And maybe we went too far this time, so we might want to bring up some of those shadows a little more. So that's a pretty good spot. Now, say we want to do something similar with the highlights. Maybe we want to brighten this area just a little bit, and maybe we want to add kind of a warming filter. Let's just say a sepia tone. So I think highlights 1 is probably a little too much. It's going to affect a little too much of the image. So I'm going to start with highlights 2, and we'll see where that gets us. So with the RGB channel selected, I'm going to command click on highlights 2. That's going to select the tonal values, the relative tonal values in our highlights 2 luminosity mask. Now I'm going to output that to a photo filter layer. And let's use the sepia option since we were talking about that. So you can see that this affects most of the image. If I bring it all the way to 100%, it's very obvious. But it doesn't really affect these darker shadow areas here. You can see these areas retain a lot of blue. Now this is a very extreme edit just to show you the effect. But we can use this for pretty subtle targeted adjustments. And similarly, we could do something like that in the shadow areas. We could also use this to combine certain masks. So let's say that we wanted to affect our midtones and highlights, but not shadows. So we might select, let's say, midtones 4 and maybe highlights 4. Whoops. So in this case, I'm going to be kind of combining the midtones 4 mask and highlights 4 mask. So now I'm command shift clicking. After I command click on midtones 4 to select that channel, I'm shift clicking on highlights 4, and you can see that adds some areas of the sky. So by doing so, you can get a more general selection. So this would behave more like an exposure slider in Camera Raw, where it's affecting the tones kind of optimized for the highlights, but not affecting the shadow areas as much. So that was a lot of information. That got pretty technical, pretty far in the weeds. So I do want to leave some time for questions. I know we're getting close to the end of this. So I'll wrap up kind of the demo part for right now. And just to summarize, Photoshop has an ocean of features and techniques, but it really doesn't have to be overwhelming. If you focus on the core tools, being masking, channels, selections, and have a solid foundational understanding of how those things work, especially with regards to white reveals, black conceals, how to use masking to selectively show and hide different things, you can really make full use of the power of Photoshop. And similarly, with some of those brush blend modes and things like that people might not talk about as much, those can be really, really helpful for refining masks, expanding upon them, but giving you the kind of control where you have this Ferrari engine in Photoshop, and you kind of need to be able to drive that on local roads when you need to, but also open up that throttle and take it on the freeway. So you can find me on Instagram at Dan the Observer. Also feel free to friend me on Facebook. I haven't had a whole lot of time to post my photos there in recent months, but there are lots of my photos on there, and I'm always happy to help answer any questions, whether it's right now or after this presentation. If you start experimenting with some of these tools and there's something that we covered tonight where you're like, oh, I remember him talking about that, but I don't remember quite what the context was or how it works, feel free to shoot me an email or shoot me a message on social media. I'm always happy to help. I really believe strongly in sharing what I've learned and helping the photo community grow. So with that said, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have had over the last hour.
Anybody have any questions? We're all overwhelmed. We have one here.
Thanks for information. Did you select multiple luminosity masks?
So selecting multiple at once?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
You would take selected one to select both highlights one and shadows one. Exactly. Yep. So you would command click on one of them. It doesn't matter which one you select. What we're trying to do is add those selections together. Like we're sitting here one
on the channel thumbnail for highlights one, it's going to select all the pixels that are on that channel. And then when I go to Shadows 5, if I keep holding Command, but this time hold down Shift, it brings up that little plus icon in the white square there on my cursor. So now when I click Shadows 5, you'll see if you watch that lower left corner where there's a really dark area, it adds in those areas. So before, where it's just highlights one, and then after, where it's the
Good.
one.
Thank you. Okay, something a little less complicated, I think. Charles Bloom is going to give us 3 smartphone tips. Charles?
You what? A few more than that. Okay, I was told 3.
A lot of these deal with iPhone, but if you've got an Android, you probably find the equivalent thing for it. When you pick up your phone, it sort of focuses. On the iPhone, all you got to do, if you don't know, is touch it. And a golden rectangle shows up where you've touched it. And that's the focus. Now, suppose you want to recompose it, but keep the focus. Okay. All you have to do is hold your finger on that golden square, and the AEAF lock pops up. And then, of course, you're locked in with it that way. As with every camera, any camera, there are a lot of things that deal with the phone that deal with the camera. For example, the whole thing with composition, rule of thirds, and all that obviously applies. I heard a very interesting thing. If you think of your phone as an extra camera, just as something that you've got, you're not going to use it that much. But think of this as a mirrorless camera. And when you've got one of the later ones, they're pretty darn good. So if you think of it as a regular camera, you'll probably use it more and take better pictures with it because you know how to use a camera. Do not use your flash. Ever. It is horrible. It doesn't work well. Keep it off. Go into your settings, wherever it is, turn off the flash and leave it off. You can use a self-timer, which the phones have, either usually 3 or 10 seconds. And if you don't see a little stopwatch icon on the iPhone, push the little caret that's above or below, depending on the phone that you've got, above and below the picture that you see. Zoom. Phones have optical and digital zoom. As with the flash, don't use the digital zoom. The older, I don't know what it is with Android phones, but with the older iPhones, you had a 3x digital. The new 16s have a 5x digital on them. So, what do you do if I want to take a picture of Richard and I can only zoom partway in that's going to get the tables around? What's the answer?
Walk up.
You can get closer, but what if you can't? Crop. Because when you crop, you've still got a lot of pixels. If you use the optical zoom to zoom in to somebody's face, you're getting rid of an awful lot of pixels. Whereas if you crop it, you've still got a lot more pixels that you can work with on that photo. Give you a couple of others. You can brighten or darken your screen, again on the iPhone. When you tap it, you get the golden square. Next to it on the right-hand side is a line with looks like a little sun in it. If you use your finger and go up and down, you go up, it brightens, go down, it darkens. Also, on the bottom of the screen, and I don't know if this is Android, there are scenes that you can do, sepia and vibrant and all that stuff, that you can do before you take the photo. Recommended advice, don't. You can do that when you edit the photo. And by the way, as far as editing photos, I think the best piece of software that I know of for the phone, which is free, is Snapseed. It does an incredible amount of work. The thing for me, at least, is working on a phone as big as this phone is. I would rather take the picture and put it on my computer and work with the software there. But how do you do that with an iPhone to a PC? It is a royal pain in the ass until I found a piece of software that makes it the simplest thing in the world. And I mean, Android, if I'm correct, you can just plug in your PC and it'll work. You know, with the Mac, it's automatic. The software is called Local Send. Local Send. You put the software on your phone, you put it on your computer, you turn them both on, you select the photos that you want on your phone to go there, you tell it to send it, you click on your computer, receive it, and they go into your download folder. It's as simple as that.
That's true for Mac, Apple to Apple too?
No, because with the Mac you don't need to. Because with this, if I've got a Mac, it goes through the cloud and it automatically is on my Mac. My pictures are on my tablet. As soon as I pick up my tablet, they're there. So my wife has a Mac. They're on hers right away. So you don't need it from iPhone to Mac to Mac.
What was that name? Snap something?
Snapseed. Seed, S-E-E-D.
Okay.
Snap like you're taking a picture, and seed like you're sticking it in the ground. Yeah,
Do
God.
you use a grip, and it's the what? Which one?
Use what?
Grip. The grip that's in.
For your phone? Yeah, you can. I mean, I've got it looks like a monopod, and it's got little feet that stick out, so it's a tripod just for the phone. It's dedicated for the phone. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. Any other questions? 'Cause I think my time's over.
Sharing app?
Pardon?
The name of that sharing app?
Local Send.
Local Send.
Local Send. I'm a very big believer in free apps. Anything else? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Art David's going to tell us about the DPI-SIG second digital competition. You're quick, Art.
A couple of updates on the second digital competition. You probably received an email from Mail-In Today. We are going to institute a new thing where the scores and comments are going to be public unless you opt out. So please, if you don't want your scores or your comments to be shared, make sure you uncheck the boxes. Nancy?
Public meaning just for our membership, right?
No,
Whoever
to
can
everybody,
log in,
to the
look
world,
at,
to the public. How can they get on Mail-In?
All our pictures are available to the public.
They are?
Absolutely. We want the world to know how good we are.
You don't have to log in to get our
Okay.
no. You don't have to log in to see our competitions. I guess that's pretty good. All right. So,
Never have.
what else did I want to say? Oh, how many of you have smartphones? Raise your hands.
Somebody want to
Everyone.
opt out?
So that's good news, especially after hearing Charles's instructions. The fourth category this time is going to be smartphone photos. So you don't have an excuse for not sending in submissions, okay? Smartphone photos, you can use any application thereafter, okay? One other thing, you should probably resize your photos to, what is it, 1040? 1024. The software will downsize the images that you send in, but we've decided that you're better off to send them in 1024, and that way there won't be any digital interference with the images. So downsizing to 1024. The instructions are on the website. Please, I'd like to see all of you send in submissions. We've got some great judges, Jim Robillard, Lisa Jeffries, and Dave Bowers, who's the president of the Flagler Beach Photography Association. He's a Christine Cook schooled judge, and he's also one of the top Florida photographers. He's got more than 10 blue ribbons in the F3C, so he knows what he's doing as well. So please, starts April 15th. I think that's on Tuesday, is that right?
Something like that.
Something like that. 5 days from now. Okay? Good luck. Thank you.
Hey, Art. Art? Six of them. Thank you. Okay. Next up, the elegant Richard Tyndall. Richard, can you get up here as fast as Art did?
Well, I had my hand in the cookie jar.
Richard's going to tell us about how successful our 2025 conference was. And there were some conference programs over on the table, so if you missed it, you could look at it and see what you missed.
It was successful. DPI-SIG accounted for about 10% of the folks that were there, so thank you for your ongoing support. If you didn't come, oh, shame on you. There was some outrageously good speakers, some classes. If you had to pay to go to the workshops that we gave you as part of your general admission, you would be in the poorhouse right now. You'd have to move to, hell, Tallahassee. So please, put it on your calendar. We're still trying to figure out when we're going to do the next one, but I think pretty much we're going to do another one. So please, 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 thank you for your support. It was a success, and most of us had a really good time. And when I finally got done, it was so nice to sleep. Now, that's the first part of my talk. The second part of my talk is to push PUG, the Photoshop Users Group. We're going to be meeting next Wednesday night. We start at 7, so you've got time to get some supper. Next week, we start again with our Adobe post-processing series, which means at least the first half of the class, depending on who shows up, is going to start out with using the Adobe products. That's Lightroom and Photoshop, how to move between them, how to use the benefits of either one, when not to bother with Photoshop, because I'm going to share with you, even though I love Photoshop, I would say a good 80% of my pictures never see it. You know, kids, in-laws, car races. I don't go to car races. Any of those other kinds of stuff. I can take care of it in Lightroom, and it does everything I want it to do. But the tools there are strong, and they already relate directly to what's in Photoshop. You can move back and forth. It doesn't have to be as scary as some people make it out to be. Yeah? So please, if you have any desire at all in taking the next step in your photography, please come. We'll go through from the beginning to the end. No question is wrong. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have this month's theme show now. Thanks to Christine Sapicki. All right, time for our door prizes. 6 door prizes tonight. By the way, that was outstanding pictures in there. Okay, the first winner is 2435.